All right, today we're diving into something really important, the deep and, often permanent damage that being isolated early in life can do to a dog. We're going to uncover how just the absence of experience can leave a scar that never really fades.
So to get our heads around what happens to a dog raised in isolation, we're actually going to start with a pretty wild story from human history. This is Kaspar Hauser. He was a boy who just appeared in Germany back in the 1820s, supposedly after growing up completely cut off from the world. And his story, his name, is what gives the scientific principle we're exploring today its name.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the boy who kicked all this off, then we'll look at the isolation experiments themselves. From there, we'll get into what Kennel Syndrome actually is, see the literal scars it leaves on the brain, and figure out why dogs are so incredibly vulnerable to it. And we'll wrap up by looking at how this all clashes with their evolution. Okay, so scientists took this idea, this concept from Kaspar Hauser's life, and they adapted it for animals. This led to what are now known as Hauser experiments, and the core question was simple. What happens when you just take the world away?
The goal was super simple, if a little unsettling. You raise a puppy in a totally bland, stimulus-free environment. No social contact, nothing. The theory was, hey, any behavior that pops up has to be pure instinct, right? It was like the ultimate mission to separate nature from nurture. But these experiments uncovered something tragic, something they probably didn't expect. It turns out isolation doesn't just show you what's innate, it fundamentally breaks the animal. These puppies, they grew up with a crippled ability to learn. They were terrified of anything new, couldn't form bonds, and would often just freeze up around other dogs. Or, even worse, become really aggressive later in life.
And look, this isn't just some weird thing that happens in a lab. It has a very real-world name, one that's sadly all too common if you talk to people in animal rescue or those who fight against irresponsible breeders. It's called Kennel Syndrome.
So what is Kennel Syndrome? Well, it's the name we give to the collection of deep psychological scars you see in dogs that spend their first 4 or 5 crucial months in isolation. Think of a puppy mill, where a little dog is stuck in a cage, no human contact, no new sounds or sights, sometimes not even seeing other dogs.
And here's the thing that's just mind-blowing. There's this tiny, tiny window of opportunity. Between 3 and 7 weeks old, a puppy is in its imprinting phase. This is when its brain is literally learning who its people are, what its species is. It learns to see us humans as family. If a puppy misses that window, the damage is pretty much permanent.
And the fallout from this, it lasts a lifetime. A dog with Kennel Syndrome is almost always going to be incredibly shy, deeply distrustful of people. They just don't have that basic self-confidence you need for almost any kind of training. The foundation it was never built.
Now get this. This damage isn't just, in their head. It's not a bad memory. We're talking about physical, measurable changes that leave actual scars on the brain itself.
This chart just lays it out perfectly, doesn't it? Studies on all sorts of animals have shown this clear difference. An animal raised in an environment with toys, challenges, and friends literally grows a heavier, more complex brain than one that's just stuck in a boring, empty box.
The scale of this effect is just remarkable. Look at this number. Even just standard captivity, like in a zoo, which is a world away from total isolation, is enough to shrink a wolf's brain mass by 10% compared to its cousins in the wild. The lack of challenge literally makes the brain smaller.
Okay, but then you see this number, and it's just staggering. The act of domestication itself, over thousands of years, has already led to dogs having brains that are, on average, more than 34% smaller than a wolf's. That is a massive physical difference.
So you've got to put those two things together, right? The domestic dog already starts with a significant physical brain deficit. Then you take that dog and raise it in isolation, you're piling on more brain damage from that stimulus-poor environment. It's just a devastating 1-2 punch.
And this physical brain damage, it shows up in some really specific, really strange ways. For instance, male dogs that were isolated from just 3 weeks old, they're completely confused when it comes to mating. They might try to mount a female from the side, or even from her head. They're clumsy, they're disoriented, and their success rate is basically 0.
And here it is. This might be the most heartbreaking, most shocking fact of this entire breakdown. All that severe confusion and dysfunction can be completely prevented with just 15 minutes of playtime with other dogs each day. That's it.
15 minutes.
So that just begs the question, right? Why? Why are dogs so incredibly vulnerable to this kind of damage? Well, ironically, the answer is tangled up in the very thing that made them our best friends to begin with.
For thousands of years, we've been selectively breeding dogs for something called fetalization, or neoteny. It's a fancy way of saying we've basically bred them to be perpetual puppies. Keeping those juvenile traits is what makes them so playful, so easy to train, and so good at bonding with us.
But here's the tragic twist. Isolation takes that whole process, everything we aimed for, and just completely flips it on its head. The goal was a strong bond. Isolation creates distrust. We bred for playfulness. Isolation creates fear. We wanted trainability. Isolation makes it nearly impossible. It corrupts everything we designed the dog to be.
So what this all comes down to is a really deep, kind of tragic conflict, right at the core of what a modern dog is, especially when it's faced with isolation.
Think about it. We literally spent tens of thousands of years shaping an animal that is biologically hardwired to thrive in our social group, in our human pack. They depend on that social contact for their very existence. So to deny them that contact, especially during that critical developmental window, it goes against their very programming.
And that really is the bottom line here. Isolating a puppy doesn't just make it sad or badly behaved. It causes real, irreversible, pathological changes to its brain and its psyche. It creates a deep scar that, for so many of these dogs, can never, ever truly heal.